Nintendo is reportedly almost discouraging Switch 2 development as studios told to launch games on the Switch 1 and rely on the backwards capability instead. This is some breaking news happening that IGN reported, but it was originally according to Digital Foundry, that a fresh new report detailed difficulties facing some developers keen on launch games on the Switch 2, but who remain unable to do so because of the lack of Nintendo's support. So it just goes on saying that Nintendo is still restricting the supply of Switch 2 development hardware and kits, instead of telling some studios to launch their titles as Switch 1 games so they could be played via backwards capability. And that has sparked frustrations for a number of developers, especially one major AAA studio that doesn't want to be named, to launch Switch 2 native versions on the game, meaning that there is no Switch 1 version, but just only Switch 2 games, while the hardware is giving some to indie creators, including the team behind the Campfire Simulator. That, if you remember, like the indie direct that happened, that's using some of that Switch 2 development. That's the only way you can play that game. And it goes on the article. It's saying that there's a lot of talk about lately that Nintendo seems to be almost discouraging the Switch 2 development to some degree. And they've spoken with plenty of developers that they've been told that their game, they should just ship it as a Switch 1 game and then rely on the backwards capability. So they're not even using the potential power of the Switch 2. So that's just something a little bit discouraging, that they're just relying that say, hey, we're going to make this game. It's going to be released as a Switch 1 and a Switch 2 game, but it's going to be on a Switch 1 game cart, but then later could be upgraded, or in this case, just use the backwards capability, meaning that it's just going to be playing like a regular Switch game. And and it continues, like, a lot of developers, they're not able to get the Switch 2 development kits. And they talked to a lot of the developers, even in the Gamescom that just happened recently in Germany, that they were just saying the same thing. They want to have a native Switch 2 game in a cartridge and would love to do a Switch only 2 version, but they cannot get the hardware at all. And Nintendo's selecting certain studios to do so. And there's just been a lack of transparency with Nintendo. And even Nintendo couldn't say anything, and they just don't understand. And it just continues, like, even like Digital Foundry said, like, I don't really understand the mindset of Nintendo with the decisions that they're making, and they don't know what the strategy is, and they're just not letting the developers of studios, I should say, the game studios, to take a crack at the Switch 2 hardware, because it's just strange, because again, they're missing the power that the Switch 2 has, and they're just limiting those certain games. And they heard, like, from there were some weird inclusions, some indie games were included, right? But there were some AAA studios that were, like, not part of the conversation. And, like, one big I would say example was the Chilling by the Fire game, which is like kind of like building a fire, and they use the game chat, and they're using the USB camera capability, meaning that it's only available for the Switch 2, but that's like probably one of the only games that is for natively for the Switch 2. So it's just weird. And as it continues, it's just weird. And most of the games, the pixel art game is going to be at 240p, and you probably don't need a Switch 2 kit. They're just going to rely on the backwards capability again. And they're hoping that, the game that they're making, either it's going to be both for the Switch 1 and Switch 2, or for now, Switch 1, and then later be upgraded for the Switch 2. And it just continues. It's like, right now, there hasn't been a lot of third-party developers that have been given the the Switch 2 development kits. And what's even weirder too, if you think about it, only a few native Switch 2 games have been released in the game cartridge. And I'm just going to exclude the game key cards because you already know what I feel about them. I don't think they're real. And the Japanese National Diet Library even says they're not, categorized as a full game. And it's just weird. Like there's only maybe the hope is that in about a year or two, once the Switch is like more and more, I would say, matured enough, that they will finally be able to release the development kits to all the studios so they could actually use the potential of the Switch 2. But for now, you can expect a lot of the games that if you would play it on the Switch, the original one, and the Switch 2, you're not going to see much of a difference. You're going to see basically the same thing. The only difference is that the Switch 2 is going to look better because of the screen, the brightness, and all that. But if we're talking about just gaming in general, there's not much of a difference. So that also asks the question, so what is the incentive to buy a Switch 2 if there's not a lot of Switch 2 games that are out? And the only 2 games right now that are popular by far of the Switch 2 that are only available for the Switch 2 is Mario Kart World and Donkey Kong Bonanza. Those are it. Those are the only ones that make sense. But other than those 2, what is there? Because most of the other games that are coming out right now is coming for the Switch, and there's probably like an upgraded version for the Switch 2. It's like 2 different versions. You can buy it or pay like a small fee to upgrade it for the Switch 2. So yeah, it is weird. I think I can kind of see both sides in that moment. Like one side I see, okay, we cannot give you the development kits right now. The reason why is because we still have a surplus of Switches, and a lot of people can't buy the Switch 2 because of how expensive it is at the moment because of the economy. Because everything rose in price, especially here in the States because of those stupid tariffs. And it gives a little bit of extra life on the original Switch, even though it's been going on for 7 years since its launch. But on the other hand, the other thing is, it's like maybe they don't want to leak the hardware. And I don't know, maybe it's a way of saying like, okay, well, maybe like the Switch 2 at the moment, there is a lot of potential, but there could still be maybe some bugs, and maybe something that a developing studio will say, ooh, you know what, we thought it could be more capable, but it's not. So it's kind of like they're being very, very careful on the product itself. So it's almost like playing devil's advocate. So, and I can see the pros and the cons right there. On one hand, it's like, okay, cool, give the original Switch owners a chance to play games and then later on upgrade them. And then the second part, the con part, is like, ooh, maybe it's too early, or they're trying to be holding the information as much as possible, right? Because they don't want other leaks to happen because of for example, like the mixed Switch that could hack, the original Switch, and now they want to hack the Switch 2. So it's a lot of things. But what about you? What do you guys think about this? What do you think that about Nintendo restricting studios of saying you can only basically make games for the Switch 1 and then rely to the backward capability? Write your comments below, and if you like the content of this video, please hit that the like button. Make sure you subscribe to my channel, hit the notification so you know when future videos are available. Alright everyone, I hope you enjoyed today, and again, stay awesome.